Hello, and welcome to CHAOSScast, the Chaos community podcast where we share use cases and experiences with measuring open source community health, elevating conversations about metrics, analytics, and software from the Community Health Analytics open source software, or short, CHAOSS project, to wherever you like to listen. What exactly is measurement marketing?
The way that we look at measurement marketing was, I like trying to do whatever people do digitally. I try to find like the offline component, because for me, it's like offline is real world, right? It's how people, buy stuff. Real world is how they should buy stuff online. And real world, people are having conversations all the time. And so when you go into a store, at least back in the day when you used to go into a store, you could, talk to a sales associate or something to purchase a product. And there was always conversations that were happening. When this whole digital thing happened and everybody moved digitally, I think a lot of people forgot conversations were still happening. It's just that the conversations are now between the users and your website in a lot of cases. In realizing that and getting back to that to say, okay, these are conversations that are going on, and realizing for the most part, you have no idea what's happening. You can't, like if you're a salesperson in the store, you can just get an idea from their feedback and how they're talking and if they're picking stuff off the shelf and all that sort of stuff. And you understand how to move that conversation forward. Digitally, you can't do that by and large. People just sort of they never thought they could, but you can. And it's by measurement you can do that. So for us, measurement marketing is that concept of listening and responding to the marketplace, whoever that is for you, however you define that.
How do you filter through all of the digital data that's available to us to make sure that this is somehow meaningful?
That's a great
to
question.
An organization.
Yeah, big data is a thing. And it's funny because I see that as a trend. I see a lot of big data and AI, and we use machine learning, and to some extent, my eyes roll back. I'm like, oh, this is just this nightmare of too much that's out there. I think a lot of people, when they first learn about measurement and digitally what they can do, the gut reaction is let's collect it all, right? Let's just measure for measure's sake. We'll have it all because you never know what we're going to need, and that ends up like if you literally did that again, think offline. If you did that in the offline world, they would say you have a mental issue, right? You're called a hoarder. But data, for some reason, is fine to do that with. But it's the exact same thing. Like, why are we collecting everything? You probably don't need to know this stuff. Instead, and this is how you get through it, in my opinion, is you have a plan, which people don't do as a general thing. They just set up measurement, they start collecting everything, but there was no plan or intention for it. So it's mostly just warehoused. And then again, they probably aren't collecting it in the right way because they didn't plan for how they were going to use it. So it just ends up being this nightmare of big data that there's too much to get through and you don't know what to do with what you've got.
Well, some of the big platforms, like if you read Facebook's instructions on Digital Marketing 101, they'll say, collect everything, throw it over to us. And then you don't really have to pay attention to specific targeting or specific measuring. We've just got this black box that will sort through every possible piece of creative you can crank out and every possible targeting parameter, and there's no way you could do it. Just throw it in the mix and we'll do it. Is that a thing, or can you say how well that works?
Yeah, I'd say it is a thing. And remember, they're very different scale, right? So for them, they've basically outsourced to all the marketers, hey, listen, we can only collect so much data when people are on the Facebook platform. But if you guys want to go out there and send everything to us, we'll also hold it for you, right? And use it. Of course, it's in their interest for marketers to do that, because everybody's sending everything to Facebook, and then Facebook can use it to help you improve your own results, but they can also help that same data that you send to them to help somebody else improve theirs, which is where they're getting it. They're leveraging all that. And they've got the scale to do that. So 100%, that's a thing.
From a competitive point of view, are you concerned about that data going over to other companies that might be better positioned to use it at all?
No, because so we're feeding the data into the platform so that we can use it. Facebook is more than likely, if you just think about big data, you need, in order for any sort of AI or machine learning to work, you need massive, massive amounts of data so they can find patterns and trends. And us sending in, if they're interacting with a certain video at a certain point, and the way that we code that video in, we're sending in a custom event. So it's being sent to Facebook in a unique way that we can identify, but not that a competitor has access to. So in other words, a competitor can't say, go find me an audience of people who go to measurementmarketing.io and watch the third video down. Like, they can't do that because they don't have access to that data. Only we do, because it's our account that sent it to Facebook. And Facebook can't really effectively use that data for any other reason for other people, because they don't know what it means either. Just from the algorithm's perspective, it sees how the things are coded in, but they're coded in our way, not a generic video event. So Facebook doesn't know it's a video. They're just recording bits of data that we go back and use, but that they necessarily wouldn't be able to use. And then after that, there's forecasting. This is the other thing that everybody skips. This is how you know if data is useful or not. It's the only way to really tell. Can you use it to forecast future events? If you cannot use it to forecast the future, it's irrelevant. It's not worth it. You literally can't use it. It's just interesting to know. And that's the death knell to anybody that's in data. Like, you do not want to collect stuff just because maybe one day, because you just fill up hard drives, right? Needlessly. But if you can say, here's how I'm going to use this information, because I'm going to forecast that next week, based upon what I'm doing, my click-through rate to this next page or from this ad or to this next step or to become a lead or whatever it is will increase by 15%. So instead of, let's say 20%, maybe it increases to 22% or 23% as an average. Like, you can forecast that. Then you measure against your forecasts. And because you're measuring for that conversation, you can literally see, like, did the conversation change? Because that's what you're doing. You're forecasting the changes to that conversation. And in doing that, if you insert a new tool, if that tool doesn't help you forecast things better, if that tool doesn't help you optimize things better, if that tool doesn't help you collect information that you otherwise couldn't collect, if that tool's not helping you to display answers in a way that you need, if that tool's not helping you plan out better questions, it's not worth using it.
When I look at some of the open source audiences today, it's interesting talking to people who run open source websites, whether they're project sites or documentation sites or open source startups, and trying to figure out and hearing what percentage of the audiences of those sites tends to run privacy tools that block Google Analytics entirely. And so there's one site that was blocking 60%, 28%, popular web development site where people are going to learn how to the latest CSS, JavaScript, and so on. They had 40% blocking Google Analytics. Is there a metric for how measurable your audience is, kind of like a meta metric of how well the metrics work?
That's a good question. I don't know that there's an easy top line metric other than looking at the general trend of what people are doing. For us, I kind of, because that's a popular question. It's like, well, if somebody's blocking analytics, like, oh my, but you get the mindset is you're losing data. Like, people are coming to the site and I don't know what they're doing, and now I'm blind. And you are to that extent for that one particular person. But your goal as a measurement person is not to know what every single person's doing on the site. It's to know what enough of the people take a sample of what's happening on the site. Because if you think about statistics, that's how it works.
So this kind of does bring up an important question, because we've been bouncing around the pillars. We've explained the pillars a lot, but there's a lot more of these concepts in measurementmarketing.io, the concept of the cave and your journey going into measurement. And I've used a lot of your idioms throughout our time here on CHAOSScast as well, the difference between a dashboard and a report. Can you go through a few of the things that you think are most important for people who are trying to measure their communities? What should they know?
Sure. So, we talked about the pillars, right? It's planning, building, reporting, forecasting, and optimizing. Equally as important to that is where you are from a measurement perspective. And by that, I mean your implementation, like what you're able to measure. So there are different stages. We call that the measurement journey. So you start off in the cave where you literally don't know what's going on at all, right? Lights are out. So your job in the cave is just to light stuff up. Like, you got to at least find a flashlight and get out of the cave. So you get some visibility. You start using tools. Like, that's what's happening. People aren't using them and they start using them. So like analytics or, Hotjar or something like that. Just something where they get some idea of what's working and what's not. Then at that point, when they're out of the cave, they're in what we call the valley visibility. That's when they can actually look around, and you spend some time there. That's something that you spend a lot of time in the valley because you're learning to use the tools more. You start using, instead of just lighting up Google Analytics, now you realize you got to set up Google Analytics. So you might do different views, you set up goals, you start setting up UTMs and tagging your traffic. So you know if it's a email that they came to the site from, or was it Facebook, or was it Google search, or whatever it is, but you can see the difference now. And then you will eventually start asking bigger questions. So relating it to like a marketing standpoint, it might be, I've got leads coming in and I know that I am getting leads, but I've got two different leads. I have a free video series lead, and I have here's your checklist lead. And which of those two leads is worth more? Well, analytics really can't answer that easily for you without a little bit of customization. So you can actually customize it, start doing some custom dimensions where that comes through. So that's where you go into the hills, right? So you're moving from the valley into the hills and you're improving your implementation. And then ultimately you hit what we call the summit, where it's that mountaintop where you might ask, like in the case of a profit marketer, they would be saying, okay, well, I need to know how much money I'm spending on my campaign, my ads, and I need to know at day 0, what are those leads worth, at day 7, at day 14, at day 30, at day 60, at day 90, because they want to know what's the velocity of return back to them based on that ad. And so that's a very simple question to ask and incredibly hard to get the answer because a lot of different data sources are coming in. You're transforming data, you're keying it together and everything else. It's complicated. It's hard to do.
Well, a lot of open source projects have so many touch points where in the process of the customer journey for an open source project, you might read some documentation and then there's going to be probably a software download, possibly a software build. And then in order to get it working, that person may spend significant time on a documentation site, cutting and pasting examples or going through multiple pages. So it seems like there's a lot of opportunities in a highly technical project, or if the product is technical and requires a lot of information, it seems like there are a lot of the kind of touch points you're talking about where you can see where people are sticking with it or falling through the cracks.
That's exactly right. So to take that exact same scenario to like the marketing world, the traditional marketing world, it'd be like an e-commerce store. So in direct response marketers, you have this very like go to this page, then this page, then this page. And it's a very linear step 1, step 2, step 3. That's super easy to measure for. In e-commerce, a little harder because they're flowing through it from different angles, coming in. Some are seeing collection pin category pages. Other people are seeing product detail pages. Some people are adding the cart and there's a multi-stage checkout process. And so to your point, you measure the stages of that, not necessarily the specifics thing on a certain page, because that may not be useful to you, but you can sort of level it up and say, how many people started investigating the documentation? How many people actually did to do the downloads? However they did that. But did they do that? Because that's a necessary stage for them to actually do whatever the final action is that you want. I think it's 100% right.
To our listeners, if you'd like to stay up to date on future episodes, subscribe for free to this podcast on your favorite podcast app. Share this podcast with your friends and colleagues. And if you have any ideas for future episode topics, or would even like to come on as a guest, please email us at podcast@chaos.community. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and until next time, this is your Chaos Community. Thank you so much, and have a great day.